So I'm thinking about a lot of questions. A big question in my mind right now is, right, the question of how do we how do we get cops to stop killing black people, right? Because I've come to understand through very many series of things, you cannot get anybody to do, you can't control people's actions, right? So you can't get anybody to do or not do anything. You can influence them, right? Influence or be influenced, we know that. And also, if that child decides they're not gonna do that thing, like I'm not gonna eat that, you can, the only way to get them to eat it is literally to force it down their throat sometimes, right? And that's forceful. So when I think about like how do we get cops to not kill black people, first thing that pops into my mind is accountability, right? Because if you see that there's a consequence, then you're gonna probably want to avoid the consequence, and that will then give you the action, right? From what I learned in teaching, positive reinforcement works better than negative reinforcement. So if you want a student to do something, instead of being like, Johnny, don't do that, you'd be like, James, oh my god, that is so great, I love, look at that work. And then Johnny all of a sudden is like, what, I want to do that, right? That's usually how it works. Positive incentive is like, or reinforcement is supposed to be a better way to teach than negative incentive. In this situation, though, we have had a lot of things already happen, right? So positive incentive is probably not the way to go, or positive reinforcement. So negative reinforcement, I guess, is going to have to be the thing. But consequences, period. Like, as of right now, I don't think there are any consequences for the police. I literally looked up, I Googled how do we hold police accountable? And police accountability. This is the first result. Political measures can influence the ways police departments are structured and behave. Political checks, both on a national and local level, including contingent federal funding, internal review, and increased reporting, can make police departments and officers more accountable. Right? People also ask. The first question is: should police officers be held accountable for their actions? Yes. The fuck. And like, what is meant by it? What are police responsible for? What values should a police officer have? All these things, right? And I clicked on this one article from Vox, How to Reform American Police According to Experts. And it has like 8 things, right? They're resonant, so I'll read them. I'll just read the points to you, right? Police need to apologize for centuries of abuse. Police should be trained to address their racial biases. Police should avoid situations that lead them to use force. Officers must be held accountable in a very transparent way. On-the-job incentives for police officers need to change, right? Like maybe you don't get pension if you shoot somebody and kill them. Or maybe you should get dismissed from the force immediately, even if it's like, even if it's just not a good look, right? If you killed somebody, to still be on the police force. Like that man who killed Eric Garner, that happened in 2014. That man was dismissed from the force in 2019. Like, so it took y'all 5 years to be like, you know what, then you might have to go. We need higher standards and better pay for police. Higher standards, period. Like, I don't want to say everybody can walk in and get the job as a police officer, but I want to say anybody can walk in and get the job to be a police officer. Police need to focus on the few people in communities causing chaos and violence instead of, broken windows policing and stuff. And yeah, hotspot policing. They want to do hotspot policing and focus deterrence. They can stop and deter crimes in a lot of areas. And we need better data to evaluate police and crime, period. Because it's very hard to, I don't know, since we know virtually nothing about crime in America other than murder, kidnapping, and arson. Rape, robbery, assault, motor vehicle theft, gangs, drugs. We don't report data back to the federal government that allows the federal government to tell law enforcement how to behave more efficiently or help researchers understand how crime is created and evolves. Interesting. What that basically was, like, that last point is my point. Before we can as we have a conversation around police accountability, there's so many conversations that need to happen because it is individuals that are in the police force that need to be addressed about their racial biases and their freaking crick ass trigger fingers and they're ridiculous. Like, that needs to be addressed. How did you make it into this law force? But bigger than that, we need to have a conversation around law enforcement, period. Because as we all know, the law does not include certain people, right? Because they wrote the Declaration of Independence while still having slaves and having slaves present in the space and all the things, right? They fought for their freedom and still had slaves. So what law are we enforcing? Serve and protect who? So these are the conversations that need to be had before we can even, because if you're holding them accountable for what? To whom? And who's holding them accountable? Because what I've noticed that I think is really funny, like, I remember learning in history, like, I thought we were supposed to be a democracy, right? I thought the whole thing was, people shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people, as V said from V for Vendetta. I thought that was how things went. But it seems that is not how things go. So I'm like, how does change really happen? Like, who do I need to talk to? And people are like, oh, talk to, like, again, with the protests, a big question I ask is, like, if you're protesting, your cries are falling on deaf ears, because guess what? This thing don't even have ears. And them cops sure can't hear you with them helmets on. So I know it's like for the visual of like people seeing it too, but this is, again, not to discredit saying like, oh, don't go do that. No, the question is, how do we have an impactful conversation? Because it seems like riots are also breaking out at protests because people are instigating things there because the agenda is not clear, and anybody could come in. So, and there's cops doing that too. So like, how do we have this conversation? And I know I know there are folks focused on figuring that out, right? There's people who are at the forefront of Black Lives Matter movement and like the movement, and people, leaders. And we need that, yes. And we need organization. And also, everybody needs to be having a conversation. It's not just people who are involved in protesting and people who are involved in Blackout Tuesday and people who are involved in boycotting this and this and that. Everybody needs to be having a conversation around this. What is the police, y'all? Do we know the history of the police? Time to do some research, right? So, that's what's on my heart.